Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all are doing great today. So we've got a lot of material to cover today. We're covering ethics and privacy, which is chapter 3. And in addition to that, we're also going to be covering chapter 10, which is information system use within the organization. So just kind of start off today, we'll be talking about ethical frameworks as well as privacy. And, to start off with that, I do have a quick little video here that unfortunately I won't be able to play due to copyright issues. But let me just kind of walk you through the video real quickly and kind of explain what happens. So basically, there's a person who's been working in a warehouse for some time, and it's probably some sort of electronic retailer, maybe somewhere like Best Buy, Circuit City, somewhere like that, where they have lots of product coming in and they're selling products that are focused on, providing technological goods to consumers. So what they have is they have this new wireless card that they released, and basically one of the people who's been there a while, he has this new trainee with him, and he basically tells the trainee, hey, just go ahead and knock down the count one, and I'm going to take this one home, and basically steal it from his employer. And the trainee's uncomfortable with that. And basically, I'm going to cut it short here, the video kind of ends with him saying, what should I do? Because the way that the trainer, basically, so I'm going to call him, the way that he kind of presents his case is that the store doesn't lose anything because the distributor gives them something. The distributor doesn't lose anything because the manufacturer gives them the product. And then lastly, ultimately, the manufacturer doesn't lose anything because by the salesperson receiving the product for free, rather. So basically, by the salesperson stealing the product, he's more likely to recommend that the product be sold. That's how he justifies it. And it's kind of how he goes through it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Kind of that example of, do the ends justify the means? And one of the ways we're going to determine that is by looking at ethical frameworks. And these are kind of the overall frameworks for how people kind of view the world. They view situations. Should you engage in something or should you not engage in something? So basically, you have these kind of overarching principles and ethical guides that you use to kind of help you determine what you should do, what your actions should be in any given situation. And with that in mind, while ethical frameworks could be similar from person to person, I'd be willing to bet that if I had an infinite amount of different situations, that the entirety of the world, there's not two people who would say the same thing every time. It should be incredibly unlikely if I could name infinite different scenarios. So kind of as we go through some of these, I'd like to hear some of you chime in. And of course, if you chime in, of course, you get the extra credit. But certainly, I'm interested to hear from you all. This is not I'm going to approach this very carefully. I'm not going to state what my opinion is. I don't want to bias you. I also don't want you all to feel like you should change your opinions on anything. It's not what this course is about at all. It's just a component of the course. So certainly keep that in mind as we go throughout this. But there is one thing that a lot of these ethical frameworks kind of have in place. And, last class we talked about the process for business process improvement. And there was a 5-letter acronym. Does anyone remember what that 5-letter acronym was? Someone chime in here and get some extra credit.
It's something MAIC.
BMAIC or something like that?
Yeah, BMAIC.
Yeah, it's the MAIC. Good job, Brandon and Jordan. Making sure I get these names written down. Yeah, so what we do is we define, we measure, analyze, improve, and control. And we do a very similar thing in the general framework. What we do is we look at the issue, we see what is happening, what are the facts. If I take this product, they're deprived of a product. That's the fact. Then we recognize what the issue is. We get the facts next. We see what is happening, who will benefit, who will be harmed, that sort of thing. We evaluate alternative actions. If we're in a situation where we're told, mark down the inventory to an inaccurate number, we have a couple different actions we could take. There's some different alternatives. We could either do what the trainer says. We could do what they say and then report them to management. We could report them to law enforcement. I mean, they are, in fact, stealing. We could say, no, I'm not going to do that. Here's the inventory. You can do it yourself. You could walk off the job right then. And there's a multitude of different alternative actions that could be done. So then once you've kind of evaluated them, you see, what do I think is best? You do that. And then after you've made the decision, you acted on it, you reflect on it. So that's kind of what you do. It's very similar to the DMAIC process. And we'll see this a couple more times throughout the semester where we have something and it all kind of relates back to each other. Any questions so far? All right, let me ask, I just want one response here. What would you do? What would your decision be if you were in that situation where you were told to mark down the inventory? What would you do? I want to hear from one person.
I would probably just say no and walk away.
Gotcha. Would you report them?
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answers to this. There's a lot of different ways to think about things. I'm not here to say what's right or wrong. I just want to kind of make sure that's very clear. But there are certain approaches that we could take. Now, in practice, these are going to be a little bit difficult to kind of distinguish between. But in the utilitarian approach, we would want to maximize the overall utility that everyone experiences. Now, this can have some downsides. Where there could be a case where maybe there's a few people who would be greatly adversely affected, but the overall majority would be very much benefited. We would still take that approach, even though it could harm some people. So we want to minimize the overall harm. But with the utilitarian approach, we're not going to be concerned with individuals. We're going to be more concerned with the entire group. So this is where we consider all aspects. And I want to hear from someone about this. Do you think that if we use the utilitarian approach, that what they did, where let's assume that the person was correct and that he would, in fact, be able to more accurately recommend and increase the overall sales of the product, with the utilitarian approach, what should you have done in that situation? Anyone want to jump in here and take a stab at that?
I'll try. So basically on the utilitarian approach compared to that situation, it would end up being that if one went in that regard, they would be for the person asking to mark down the inventory, because it's basically a way of looking at it that it's a form of, I don't want to say profit, but gain, like a gain to things.
Yeah, I mean, if the assumption that he made is correct, that he's able to better sell the product because he's used it and owned it, then, from a utilitarian perspective, that is what you should do. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting that you go steal anything or do anything like that. Just from a utilitarian perspective, if we're looking at this from a very pure sense, that's how we would approach it. That's exactly correct. Now, a rights approach is going to be a little different than this. A rights approach, we're going to have something where we would never, or at least we would do every effort to avoid encroaching on any sort of person's rights that they have. So a lot of different debates and kind of definitions as to what these rights would be. But in general, they're going to include things like the truth, the right to have access to the truth, the right to have privacy, the right to life. We think about some of the John Locke philosophy. We have the life, liberty, property. We think back to some of Jefferson's. You add in pursuit of happiness. Whatever the case may be, we want to ensure that we're protecting the rights of everyone involved. So I don't think that would really necessarily be that applicable to the video that we saw, because there's not really any encroachment upon rights. Maybe you could argue for property rights encroachment by taking the property. That could be a fair argument there, but that's pretty much what we're talking about with rights. Now, fairness approach. Fairness approach is where we basically approach everything with complete fairness. True equality. Everyone's equal under the law. That sort of thing is what the fairness approach is. And, there's two different definitions of what equal is. In some cases, it would be true, we treat everyone the same. And in other cases, it would be we treat everyone fairly. Now, there's a distinction there. And, I don't want to get into anything, too controversial there. But there could be a distinction between what some people consider fair and what other people consider equal. So I like to think that I take the fairness approach to grades. I don't think that there's that many people who would disagree with, but there may be some. But basically, you take the test, you get the score, and I usually do some sort of curve or something just to make sure there weren't any bad questions on it or anything like that. But beyond that, you get the score. It's not like there's subjective essays that I'm grading or anything like that. It's pretty cut and dry, and I think that's the best way to go. A lot of times you could also see this with like a pay scale. If you had a lot of the public sector jobs are going to have a pay scale where people are paid according to what the government or whoever the body is considers to be fair. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I want to make that very clear. But yeah, that's certainly what the fairness approach is. So common goods approach, basically what this is saying that there's some level of goods that are, quote, common to the community. And the goods should not be kind of diminished. So this would be things like natural resources, beaches, those should all be available, and they shouldn't be harmed. We also have common goods like, police, law enforcement, our court system, fire department, ambulance, EMS, all that sort of stuff would be common goods that everyone is able to use and that they basically serve the community. So that's pretty much what this approach would be. I don't think that this common goods approach would necessarily have an answer to the situation presented in the video either. But that's pretty much what they are. We just go throughout society and we respect everyone and we have compassion on people. That sort of thing is what this common goods is. Now, deontology is a little bit different. Deontology is going to take a look at ethics from a very rigid set of rules. And I have on here law and order. It's not necessarily laws. Deontology would not necessarily be following every law. It would more be about following every moral principle that you hold. And this is one where it's not going to be based on consequence. So the book uses a very graphic example, and it is a graphic example, but it's an example that's very applicable. So it says that, basically, if you were opposed to any sort of ending of human life and someone broke into your home, you wouldn't kill them. Even in self-defense, killing would be wrong, so you wouldn't do it. Having said that, that could be there could be some pretty severe consequences from that. What if the person who breaks in, does it to you? I mean, that's certainly something that would not be a good thing if it happened to you. So someone chime in here and say, what do you think a deontologist would say if they were opposed to stealing about the situation? So the deontologist is completely opposed to stealing of any kind, and they were in the situation where they were told to mark down the inventory a little bit. What do you think they'd do?
Would they report it? But that means the person who stole will get in trouble. And you said a deontologist really, isn't about consequences. So.
Well, I think that they could report it. That's certainly something they could do. They could also not engage in it, but not report it. I think those are the two main options there. I certainly don't think a deontologist who's opposed to stealing would, mark up the inventory down one and say there were only 24 when there were 25. So that's a great answer there. But yeah, I mean, when I say it's not based on consequence, I mean that they're not so concerned with what their action will do. They're more concerned with the principles behind their actions. Does that make sense? So. The example of someone breaking into a home, that'd be a very unfortunate circumstance. But if a deontologist were opposed to, the ending of a life, they're not going to protect themselves in a way that would lead to that. So that's pretty much what that's all about. And again, I'm not trying to say anything is right or wrong. We're also going to skip that since this is a kind of small group. But yeah, so, I just talked about each of these different ethical, and these are only 5 examples of ethical frameworks. There's a lot of ethical frameworks we could discuss. Each of these are very different from each other. They would approach the situation completely differently. Maybe you would still have the basic ethical framework in place, but you wouldn't necessarily all process things the same way. You wouldn't have the same principles behind how you would evaluate a situation. So from a company standpoint, that could be very problematic because if each employee has a completely different set of beliefs instead of morals, whatever you want to call them, then how does an employee do what's right or wrong? And that's where the code of ethics really comes in. So what companies do with a code of ethics is they say these are the ethical policies that our employees are going to abide by, and that our community, that we want to see our community abide by, that sort of thing. And that's going to make sure there's not going to be any sort of ambiguity surrounding that. So if we had a code of ethics that said stealing is wrong, fraud is incorrect, we don't do that in our company, then we wouldn't have a situation where there would even be a question. You wouldn't tolerate it. And, maybe as opposed to the employee who was a trainee, so the person who was asked to do it, maybe instead of going to their boss and saying, hey, I saw this happen, I don't think this is right, maybe you want to look into it a little bit more. Maybe instead what we could do is we could have an anonymous ethical hotline where you can anonymously report something and it can be looked into. And then maybe some people feel more comfortable doing that. I don't know. Someone chime in here. Would you rather report something to your boss, or would you rather report it to an anonymous hotline? Any opinions about that?
Personally, I'd rather just report to the boss, because you can directly just go to the hierarchy and explain, like, hey, this is happening. And it also makes you look innocent, or you're catching that, so you're not in trouble, because sometimes people like guilt by association. And yeah. Gotcha.
Let's see here. Looks like I got a comment. I'll read that off as well. Report it to boss. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a case where I think that some people would rather report it to their boss. It also could depend on the rapport you have with your boss. If you have a very good relationship with your boss, maybe you'd be more inclined to just say, hey, I saw this happen. I appreciate you look into it with some discretion, maybe. Or maybe you don't have the best, or maybe you're wanting to report your boss. That could certainly be something that you could want to do. And I say you, I don't really mean each of you listening. I mean in general, it's possible that a person could want to report their boss for some ethical situation or unethical situation. I guess you wouldn't report them for being ethical, would you? It's another story there. Anyway, so you kind of see that's something that a company could do to kind of minimize the, the hesitation, basically. Okay. And, with these, there's really going to be about 3 main ethical tenets. So first we have responsibility. And responsibility is whenever a person says, I accept the consequences, I messed up, I'd like to fix it. Let's work together and let's find a solution for it. That's what responsibility is all about. It's taking the blame, and it's just internalizing it, basically. Accountability is where you actually determine who is responsible. So you'd evaluate the situation. You would say, okay, here's what happened in the situation, and based upon this, I believe this person is responsible or not responsible. And liability is about actually basically recovering damages from a legal standpoint. So if you're liable for something that you did, it means that you can be sued and you can have damages recovered from you. Or if you're the inverse, of course, you could receive damages. So that's basically what the 3 ethical tenets are, and that's going to drive a lot of what we have seen here. Okay, so I've got 3 examples here. Of course, we have Wells Fargo. Can anyone tell me what Wells Fargo is famous for recently for doing that was considered by many to be unethical?
Wasn't it something along the lines of some of the employees were charging extra fees to put into accounts they set up through the same company so that they could obtain money or kind of steal it from customers or something like that?
Yeah, so basically what happened with Wells Fargo is they had 5,300 employees who were creating accounts on behalf of clients that they didn't ask to be created. And Wells Fargo, on a lot of those accounts that are being created, they charge fees. And in addition to having that, it also could have impacts on your credit score. It could make if you're trying to buy a home at the time, maybe you have a higher rate because you had, extra accounts, newly created accounts, that sort of thing. Could impact your credit score as well. So yeah, that's considered unethical. And there are 5,300 employees who engaged in that. That's a huge amount of employees. So that's kind of an interesting example. It happened recently. I believe it was around maybe 2016, 2017. I'm not sure of the exact date, but that's what happened. I remember the 5,300 number. This person right here is Jerry Sandusky. And, I'm not going to talk about him, but the university was allegedly aware of his actions, and they didn't act upon it. And that caused the university a lot of negative publicity, a lot of money, a lot of donors. Really did not do well for the university. And then anyone recognize this person right here? So this right here is Bernie Madoff. He is famous for running the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Basically he was taking people's money in, and the people who had already invested, he was paying them with the money that he was getting in. And basically there's a lot of money that was never accounted for. I think somewhere in the billions of dollars were never accounted for at all. So these are some real world, very famous examples of ethical situations or unethical situations rather. Let me make sure I get my wording correctly on that one. And basically what happened is, these are very famous, and they really show the consequences of unethical behavior. Each of these, Wells Fargo suffered a very large hit. The university, I believe it was, I don't want to say the university if I get it wrong, so I'm not going to say it, but I believe it was a Pennsylvania institution, really suffered a lot of unenrollment. They didn't have as many people want to go there that next year. And of course, Madoff's still serving in prison today. So then we talk about ethics and IT. We have all this technology. How does ethics play a role in our technology? So tomorrow we're going to have a good discussion on this regarding the privacy of information, the privacy of your location, the privacy of who you associate with. That's certainly something we're going to talk about. And in general, privacy is a lot larger than just that. It's about the information that's being collected, how it's distributed, how it's shared, how long it's stored. All that's very important, and it's very valuable as well. There's certainly a very large market for data brokerage, which is, of course, the selling of information. Also, make sure the information is accurate. Inaccurate information in an information system could be very detrimental to the organization as a whole. If we're talking about financial information and we don't have a good grasp on, what we have inside of our accounts, then we could be in a lot of trouble. We also talk a little bit about, whoops, sorry about that, guys. I knocked over my water bottle there. Anyway, we talk about accessibility, and that's making sure that the information or the information system as a whole is accessible to people with disabilities, that they're able to view the information in the same way. And, it's also important that we consider the cost of doing that in addition. So if we can very inexpensively incorporate a screen reader, for example, into our website, and we can incorporate technologies to help with low vision, and we can maybe incorporate, if we have a video, running it through an online service to get some captions on it. That'd be great for us to do. Certainly could make our information more accessible. And then lastly, property rights, of course. That's basically just saying, what do you own? How is what you own infringed upon by others? That's what property rights are in a nutshell. So I have the definition of privacy here. It says the right to be left alone and free of reasonable personal intrusions. And that's basically what we talk about when we talk about privacy. So, in terms of information, there's a couple key things that we want to look at. We want to see how much information is being collected, how much information is being shared. And, in addition to how much, it's very important that we know what that information is. Certainly certain types of information, we may be a little bit more sensitive to it getting out there than others. The whole process behind all this, companies can collect all this information on individual people. And let's say that a firm wanted to actually then compile all this information into a report about you. Well, they would do that through the profiling process, and they'd end up with a digital dossier that basically describes everything they know about you. So it could be, your browsing habits. It could be who your friends are on social networks. It could be who often likes your post on social networks. It could be, what websites you visit, how long you visit them for, how many links you click on them, how often your mouse moves, just anything. There's really a multitude of information. Where do you go? What sort of things do you buy? If they have your credit card, they can certainly see, what are you buying? All those are going to be recorded on your transactions. And, that could be, some people would find that to be a little scary. Some people don't mind it. I'm not here to say whether you should or should not mind it. I just want to tell you what it is, basically. So I have a really interesting video. I highly recommend you watch this video if you get a chance. There's a data broker, and the whole industry as a whole is really kind of under fire from many groups. They believe that it's an unethical industry, maybe that it's collecting information, and this data broker actually argues that it's information that people know is being collected and that they consent to it by still continuing to use certain websites, maybe like social networks. If they use those cards, like I think Kroger has a discount card of some kind. A lot of stores have discount cards like that, where they basically, if you get it, you get lower prices, but then they can sell your information as they see fit. So, for a lot of people, that's something that they would certainly not hesitate to do. It saves them money. And hey, if the companies make a little bit of extra money, that's fine with them. Other people disagree. So I'm not here to say what's right or wrong. It's just a really interesting conversation. I think it's only a couple minutes long. It's a really great video. But there, he does make a great point that consumers are not powerless in this. They can decide what they want to use, and they can understand how the information is shared. So the first thing to do, if you're on an online service, is to review your privacy settings. See what information is being shared. If you're on a site like Facebook or like Twitter, you can go in there and you can see who can view my posts, who can view my pictures. Can friends view my pictures? Can people who are not associated with me view my pictures? Can friends of friends? That sort of thing. And in addition to that, you could also read privacy policies. Now, this one could be a lot more challenging to do, especially from a consumer standpoint, because are privacy policies long or are they short? They're typically, 20 plus pages long. I don't know about you. I don't really feel like reading that for every service I use. I assume no one actually reads every privacy policy they use. Of course, knowing my luck, someone's going to comment on the video later on YouTube and say, I read them all. Well, that's fine. Anyway, but the most power that you have in terms of protecting information is to not post information that would be damaging to you. So if you don't post it, it doesn't matter what the privacy policy is on the site. It could say it'll never leave our servers, but it could leave their servers. Or they could say it's never going to be shared. Take Snapchat, for example, something like that. If you send someone a Snapchat, and they screenshot it, you don't know what they're going to do with that screenshot later. So if you sent them something that could be used against you down the road, that could be something that could be harmful. But they couldn't use it against you down the road if you never sent it to them in the first place. So certainly the best way to secure information is going to be to not put the information out there in the first place. But beyond that, there's other things you could do as well. Of course, you can use private or incognito browsing to make sure that, whatever is inside of your web session, as soon as you close it, it's completely wiped. There's not going to be any sort of saved tracking cookies or anything like that. It's all going to be unique to that one session that you're on. Now, having said that, if you sign into those accounts in a private browsing window, well, they're still going to get your information that way. But if you don't sign into those accounts, you're going to be a lot more, you're going to have a lot less tracking occurring. Then, of course, you could also use something like a VPN service. Those are going to be used if you're wanting to maybe appear as though you're in a different location. Maybe you want to use public Wi-Fi and you don't want to, you're not using an SSL encrypted website, which is pretty rare in 2020. Most websites are going to be SSL encrypted. But if they're not, that's certainly something you could do to mitigate the risk from that. Any questions so far? Okay. Certainly, like I said, as we go through these, feel free to ask any questions that you have. I'm happy to address any questions or comments. But also, we have surveillance as well. So in addition to, having the privacy, we also have surveillance. So there's mainly two types of surveillance. There's physical surveillance and there's digital surveillance. And of course, in physical surveillance, it's things like, where are you physically located? So you have security cameras. They could do things like facial recognition, see where you are. They could also do things like heat map analysis and see where do people walk within a retail store. We have technology that could do that for not a lot of money. I mean, you could probably get a contractor to come in and do heat map analysis for, a couple days within a retail store, maybe a couple $1,000s, see where are people's eyes focused, what does their eye tracking look like? Where do people walk? Where do they look at a store? How long does the Do they wait to purchase an item? How long do they look at an item? That could be very valuable information. You could certainly gain a lot of insight from that for just a little bit of money. Of course, the flip side of that is some people will be uncomfortable with them having that information. Many people may find that creepy. Again, I'm not saying you should find it creepy. I'm not saying you should not find it creepy. But it's certainly something we could do. Of course, we also could do things like, have digital locks where we can easily tell who entered the building, when did they enter the building, that sort of thing as well. So that's basically physical surveillance. Then the flip side is we could do digital surveillance. So digital surveillance, we could have things like a corporate firewall, or we basically track each user, what are they accessing, how long are they accessing it for, what are they doing on their computer, what applications do they have on their computer, what applications do they use on their computer, are they wasting time at work, are they only working, that sort of thing. So again, I'm not saying you should be okay with it. I'm not saying you should not be okay with it. I'm not stating an opinion. That's just what the surveillance is. So another thing about privacy policies, so there's really two main types of them. So the first type is going to be where everything is going to be automatically selected for you. And, you're automatically going to have your information shared, but you have the option to opt out of all that. So you go in and you manually opt out. Now, of course, the flip side is they don't share anything until you give them permission to. That'd be opt-in. So those are two main types of, policies for, how you would actually have the information be used by the firm. You can either opt in to the share, you can opt out of it. So you could see some combination of it. Maybe some basic information is always shared, but then for the more specific information, maybe that could be on an opt-out basis. But the whole goal of one of these is to really kind of set a contract with the users and with the company to determine what data are they going to use, how are they going to use it, how long will it be stored for. All that sort of stuff is going to be covered inside the firm's privacy policy. Okay, so now I'd like to hear from one person on here. This is basically a photo I found online that was a store where they were giving out, I think it's some sort of, I think it's called a Funko Pop. I'm not really sure exactly what they are. I'm not too up on them. But anyway, they're giving out these for completion of a positive survey. Someone give me their opinion on that.
The surveys wouldn't necessarily be valid. People just complete them, to fulfill that free gift.
So you would say this is unethical?
They would just write something positive just so they could get the free gift. It really wouldn't be genuine.
Gotcha. So you would say this is this is unethical then?
Yeah. It would look good on paper, but it really wouldn't help anything.
Gotcha. Well, I used my Microsoft Paint skills to remove the positive word and just put free with completion a survey. Someone else chime in and say, do you think this is okay?
Yeah, I would say that's okay because it makes people give a reaction to the store in general. So it would be a little more genuine than if it's a positive survey.
Okay. So again, this is something that you could see in the real world. Like I say, I found this picture right here online, and I just changed it up to use it in my slides here. I think this is very interesting. You could approach this from a lot of different angles. On the one hand, you could say, well, what if those could have been sold for money? I believe that I was reading some of the comments on this post that was made that said these weren't really selling all that well. I don't know anything about them. Anyone actually know anything about what these things are? Anything like that?
It's just little figurines from games and movies and TV shows and stuff.
So
a lot of people
like,
use them like collectibles.
Gotcha, collectibles. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's probably not worth a lot of money to the firm. And, if they're getting surveys, that could be worth it to them. Providing survey incentives is very common. In a university setting, a lot of times the survey incentive would be extra credit. So, people are doing research projects, they need to have human participants. They would offer research, or not, they would not, let me rephrase it. They would offer extra credit in exchange for you participating in the research. But companies could offer discounts, they could offer freebies. But in general, you wouldn't see them offer it for a positive survey. You would just see it for offering a survey. Maybe they give you $5 off your next purchase, something to that effect. So here's a privacy policy, just a quick little example I found. To be honest with you, I don't remember where I got this from. Probably Google, but I don't remember exactly. But basically, this is just saying that whenever you access their thing, they're going to log information about, where your IP address is, what the location of that is, how much bandwidth you're using, what you browse to, that sort of thing. I guess must have been from an internet service provider. I believe this looks like Google right here. So this is talking about how they're going to use your personalized ad content to provide you with ads that are more relevant to you. So that's basically what they're saying. Of course, you can opt out of that if you'd like to. Someone give an opinion on that. What do you think about personalized ads? Anyone I haven't heard from today who wants to share anything about it? So, personalized ads would be like, let's say that a person looks at a lot of bicycles online. Maybe because they look at a lot of bicycles online, when they visit a web page, instead of just getting an ad for, I don't know, some vitamins, maybe they get an ad for bicycle parts or a bicycle. So what do you guys think of that?
I think it's a little scary because I know after talking about certain things, I'll end up getting an ad about it later, and it's kind of creepy to me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are going to find that to be a little bit creepy. Let's see. It looks like we got a comment as well. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people do find them invasive. So you can, in a lot of cases, you can actually disable that, and you can have it not be personalized. But some people also find it to be convenient. They like to see things that are relevant to them. They don't like to see random things. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to look at that. And I'm not here to say what's right or wrong. So here's an example of facial recognition. And this is going to become more common probably in the next decade. But basically the whole premise is that, cameras are able to take high enough resolution photos or, really a video stream to recognize people with very high accuracy. We're talking about over 99% accuracy. And, this is something that, in addition to that, there's also some cases of, I want to say it was Target who got in a lot of hot water for this. This is at least 10 years ago where they, it's kind of funny, but it wouldn't be funny if it happened to you. They actually sent a female shopper a bunch of coupons, and they congratulated them on being pregnant. And I don't think the person was actually pregnant, so I don't know what happened there exactly. But it's funny if it doesn't happen to you, I guess. But it wouldn't be funny if it did happen to you. But that's the sort of thing we could see in the future, where we can recognize certain medical conditions just from a photograph. Certainly, you could recognize things like jaundice. You could certainly recognize things like conjunctivitis, pink eye. You could recognize a lot of different conditions. You could recommend products to treat them. You could also recognize maybe even skin cancer. Resolution security camera, you could probably tell who has melanoma. What should you do with that information? Should you tell the person? Should you not tell the person? I don't know. That's not one I'm going to touch with a 10-foot pole, but it will certainly become, more likely that will be able to be determined. So here's another one right here. This is a person that I found online who it looks to be at a work desk. And anyone recognize that website on their right monitor there?
Facebook?
Yeah, it's Facebook. What do you think about using Facebook at work?
Probably not the smartest decision.
Yeah, so it's there could be some jobs. Let's say that she's a social media whatever for the company. Then it would probably make a lot of sense for her to be on Facebook. But if she's not, she could be accused of cyber loafing, and that could be problematic. So, I guess the difference is, what if she's working from home now? Well, then she could probably do whatever she wants, and it's fine. But that's a different story. So, it's probably not best practice to have it so visible if you're going to do it, or maybe, I don't know. But that's a good example of that. Then I have Enron. Enron's probably one of the most famous examples of fraudulent behavior for a firm. So basically what they were doing is they were writing off losses in a way that were inappropriate to do. But I believe at the time it was not explicitly illegal to do. And of course, they've since changed a lot of the rules and stuff. We've had the Sarbanes-Oxley and stuff since then. that really kind of change the reporting guidelines, and they make it more enforceable to have, to basically put an end to unethical behavior. Sure, accounting majors could probably tell a lot more about that, but basically they were just writing off losses in a way that appeared to have them not even be a factor when, in fact, they were still there. So you don't want to have that happen. Hardy went over Wells Fargo. We didn't do that. So yeah, just in conclusion, ethics and privacy, there's a lot of different opinions on it. And I'm not going to test you over what is right or wrong. That's not something I could even do. I mean, it's how do I make a test question and, grade that? That'd be impossible. But there are certain cases in which stuff, could be determined to be right or wrong by a law. Could also be determined to be right or wrong by, a company, having some sort of ethical handbook or ethical guidelines. And that's what you should really be, kind of cognizant of, is that, within all the things that you could do that could be considered to be right or wrong, there could be some cases in which it is extremely cut and dry. Then also with privacy, you have some degree of control over that. Not necessarily 100% of control over, but you have a fair amount of privacy control. So any questions before we move on to chapter 10 here? Like I said, we are covering a lot of material today, 2 chapters. I believe this is one of the only times we're doing that this semester, but these are usually pretty quick chapters anyway. So in chapter 10, we're going to look at some more types of information systems and talk about how they're used throughout the organization. So the first one we're going to cover is a transaction processing system. Then we're going to talk about different functional areas within an organization and show how they use information systems to basically make their processes more efficient and also to have a lot more information available to them. We'll look at the ERP in a little bit more detail today, and also we'll cover some examples of competitive advantage and show how commoditization plays a role in that. So anyone here ever watch Office Space? I'm sure you all have. There's a really funny scene here if you get a chance to watch it. Basically what happens is you have the boss here who tells his employee to make sure that he does the TPS report. And that's really the only reason I have it in here, because we're about to talk about transaction processing systems. So I think it's kind of funny that it is in here, but yeah, that's what it is. So a transaction processing system, as the name would suggest, is the system that is going to handle any sort of buy or sell for the firm. So if they're buying something, it's going to go throughout their transaction processing system. If they're selling something, it's going to go throughout the transaction processing system. So basically the input, of course, is an order. An order is comprised of things like the item, the quantity that's being purchased or sold, whether or not it's being sold or purchased, the method of payment, the date of the transaction, the time of the transaction, all that's going to go in as an input. And that's going to comprise a transaction. It's going to go and it's going to be processed. And in the processing phase, basically what happens is it's going to send out that information to several different components. So first it's going to do, if we're talking about something that's not like a store transaction, we're talking about maybe a business-to-business transaction, it's going to send out an invoice. Maybe it's going to send out a monthly bill of some kind. And it's going to send that out to the people who are purchasing it or the businesses who are purchasing it. In addition to that, it's also going to maybe adjust the quantity that we have within our inventory. So if we had 1,000 boxes of paper and we sell 500 boxes of paper, it's going to handle that. It's going to know that we sold those papers, so we can no longer have them within our inventory. And then lastly, we would also have things like reports and all the data that's going to be stored. And we can easily determine a lot of different things from a transaction processing system. When do most people purchase from us? Do they purchase from us throughout the day equally? Or are there certain hours where we need to have more staff available? Because let's face it, let's say we're a store like, let's just go with Walmart. Walmart's a simple example here. Let's say we have 20 workers working at a Walmart. And we want to determine how do we most efficiently use their time. So we look at each day and we'd see, okay, on a Tuesday, we seldom have many customers in the store at 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. So we could do stuff with that information. Like we could say, okay, so instead of having 5 registers open, well, we're using Walmart as an example. Instead of having 2 registers open, we're only going to have 1 register open. That's a little joke there. I shouldn't make any jokes like that, but I will anyway. So Walmart's going to cut down the register from 2 to 1 because there's not going to be many customers in the store at that time. So with that information, they could instead say, well, it's a great time to stock because if there's no one in the store, it's going to be easier to get a lot of these large pallets of, whatever in and out of the aisles and to stack things, it's going to be a lot easier for us to do from that time. And then maybe they look at this and they say that, man, from 5 to 6, we really have an influx of customers. So we're going to take some of our people who would otherwise be stocking, and we're going to have them man some registers. And they're going to be able to do things like that. And that's what we would do as a firm. We would take a look at this and see when our transactions happen, down to the minute sometimes. And we can really do this at a very high level. And we can do this with multiple stores. We can do this with a single store. We can do this with a region. We can do this with certain departments within a store. Lots of different options we have there. So there's really 2 main types that we can actually use to process these. So, originally, most of these were going to be done at a batch, in batch processing. And basically what that means is that at midnight or some other time, we're going to basically process all the transactions for the day. And this contrasts with kind of a more modern way to do things, which is going to be using online transaction processing. And this is going to be more real time. So as transactions arrive, we're going to go ahead and process them. So this allows us to have things like maybe a little bit tighter cash flow. We have even more cash available to us. We don't have as much delays on things like that. And it could also enable us to have things like, certainly having a more up-to-date inventory. So stuff like that could be very beneficial. So that's basically what we're talking about. Now, a functional area is, just to review, a functional area is, of course, just a department. So there's a lot of different departments within organizations, and each are going to have slightly different departments. But in general, they're going to have a couple key departments we're about to talk about. And we could have IS, information systems, that specifically help those certain functional areas. So most companies are going to have some sort of accounting and finance department. And with that, if they didn't have an information system, I talked about on the first day, they would have just, huge rooms. If we're talking about a multinational corporation, they'd have huge rooms full of binders and files and all this sort of stuff with all their transactions that they recorded. And that'd be a very monumental task to go through even just a couple physical files. But you're talking about having to go through, possibly, dozens of filing cabinets worth of stuff. That'd be very difficult to do. So with information systems, we can instead have all those to where they can easily have access to everything inside of a system. And they can run different queries to say, I want to have all the transactions for this time period from this person, from this firm, maybe from this location, from this region, whatever the case may be. They can easily run different queries to allow them to more accurately kind of obtain all that information, and much quicker as well. So they can do a lot of different things with these. They can certainly do some forecasting. We'll do some examples of that in class, where we'll do different basic types of forecasting. Of course, there are more advanced classes where you'll do a lot more forecasting. But this is an important thing to learn, to where you can basically determine what is the likely demand going to be in the next year. For each month, we can do seasonal forecasting. We can do, overall demand. Lots of different options there. We could also do things like make sure we have good budgets, look at our transactions, making sure we're on track with all of that. Control and auditing. Again, we talked about that, I believe, on the first day. But that's basically what we're doing there. We're having all of our transactions. We can easily filter for what we're looking for. We just got a ton of options that we would not have otherwise had. So marketing. This is where we are able to have a more complete picture of what our customers are. So we can do things like do basic analytics on our customers. We can see this is our demographics that are purchasing our product. Maybe it's 25 to 30-year-old males in urban areas, something like that. We can easily see that. And in addition to having that sort of, now we can also get even more granular with this, and we can see each individual person. We can have information stored about them. Now, again, this could get a little bit, could be some privacy concerns raised by that, but that's certainly something that is within the possibility of what we do. If we're talking about maybe high value transactions, maybe high value customers, we could also purchase digital dossiers on our customers and better reach out to what they're interested in. So that's certainly another possibility as well. Maybe we could say, hey, happy birthday, here's a coupon, something like that. So that's all going to be stored within our customer relationship management system. So production and operations management, This is where we're going to do things like we're going to see how can we reduce money on logistics. So we'd be able to have, tens of millions of different shippings coming in. We'd be able to analyze data on that and see how could we save money and time on getting our goods and services shipped to and from us. Then we could also have things like inventory management, making sure we have an accurate count of things, where they're located. All that's going to be very beneficial to us. Quality control, again, just making sure that we're tracking, what sort of products we're producing. Are they meeting our quality guidelines? Are they not meeting them? If we have that information, we can certainly see a lot of things. So there's a lot of other things on here as well, making sure we're effectively doing production and operation management. We're going to cover that in a later chapter as well. We're actually going to look at supply chains. We're going to see how can we make the supply chain more efficient. We have certain people allocated to certain tasks. That's what we're going to do there. So it's a lot of things that our information systems can really aid in our using. Human resource management. This is going to be something where we can use these systems for a lot of different things. So at the basic level, we could post jobs online, and we could receive candidates from not only our, immediate county or, surrounding county. We could receive candidates worldwide, and we can recruit a lot of different people. We can screen those applicants a lot more effectively. We can search for keywords. We can search for certain degrees we're looking for. We can search for job experience, whatever the case may be. We can filter out people, quite a lot easier than we could if we had to look at physical resumes every time. Now, having said that, again, there's certainly going to be some concerns. There's going to be some people who are not satisfied with that. Probably a lot of people are not going to be satisfied with that. But some people are. So it is something that we can, if we're the company, it's going to be pretty advantageous for us. Human resource development, basically just training. We can certainly have training programs that are done online. They could be on demand, and they're not going to cost us a whole lot of money to have access to. So things like, basic compliance training is going to do just fine for us to have those hosted online. Onboarding, offboarding, those sorts of things. You just have a little online course that you send the people to, complete, and then that doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to have maybe hours of an employee's time devoted to that, training programs. HRM planning, determining how we should allocate our existing workers, how we should maybe hire new ones. If we need to do any sort of downsizing, anything like that, we can certainly engage in that a lot easier with an information system, as well as benchmarking. So if we have a new position that we need to host, in addition to us being able to post our job posting online and get applicants from worldwide, we can also see what other companies are hiring, what their salaries are. We can use sites like Glassdoor and see how many people they have working there approximately, what they're making. Lots of great information we can use to our advantage if we're a company. So there's a quick little video here. It's a really humorous one. Basically what happens is that Milton Friedman, the guy with the red stapler in Office Space, he'd actually been let go about 5 years ago, I think it was. And they were still paying him, though. So he still kept coming in, and no one really kind of caught the mistake. So what happened is that the two consultants they brought in, they said they fixed the glitch, and one of the managers was a little bit confused as to what they meant by that. And he said that, they won't be getting a paycheck anymore. It's a really humorous clip there. But basically, that's just showing the importance of having accurate information within an information system and ensuring that the people who are working are actually working, that they're not terminated employees. So, one of the ways you could do that is to have sort of business reports to show maybe who your employees are. That's one example of, what your reports would be, what they're making, what they're being paid, that sort of thing. There's different types of reports, though. When we think about business reports, these are just 5 examples of reports. There's really a multitude of reports. So routine reports would be any sort of report that's going to be automatically generated at maybe some set interval, something like that. This could be like an hourly sales report. This could be a daily sales report, weekly sale, whatever that could be. It doesn't have to even be sales reports. We could look at, our weekly inventory. We could look at our weekly anything. I mean, it could be monthly, annual, doesn't matter. So just any sort of routine report is going to have some set interval, and it's going to have some predetermined contents within it. Then this kind of contrasts with ad hoc reports. Ad hoc reports can be generated on demand, and these are going to enable the managerial staff, or it could even be your operational staff as well. But basically, it's going to enable people to drill down into this information. So, for example, let's say we had a report that had the entire globe on it. And we're a multinational firm. We're operating in every country. I don't know of many companies that do truly operate in every country, but let's say we do. And we want to see the sales in maybe the African region. Maybe we want to see sales in the Asian region, something like that. We want to see a very specific sale. So we just click on that region, and then we're inside that region. And we say, well, this is all great and all, but, there's some discrepancies between the different countries inside of it. So we click on the countries we're interested in. We're able to see the sales. We're able to see, all the information that we have surrounding them. And, that's certain stuff we do inside of a drill down report. A key indicator report is going to be a little bit different. So a key indicator report is going to focus on, measures that we find to be very important to the firm. This could be anything. You may have this information located on like a dashboard or something where it's constantly updated. But a lot of times it's going to be things like daily sales, maybe hourly sales. Maybe if you're a fast food restaurant, it's like, what is the running average for the time that's spent at the drive-through window, something like that. Where we have stuff that is very important to our business that is going to be kind of somewhat high level in a lot of cases, because, you wouldn't have things like the current quantity of some random item. You would have things like, what are your sales? What are your income? That sort of thing. Then comparative reports. This is going to be generated on demand, where you're basically comparing two or more things. So one example of this could be maybe you want to purchase, some location. You want to purchase a new site, and you have maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 different sites that you want to consider for doing so. And you would have a comparative report. You'd say, here's the different cost of them. Here's the people within this location. Maybe here's the education level of the people inside of each of these different locations. Here's the major roads near here. What sort of traffic is going to be there. Maybe how many cars go by. All that sort of thing is stuff you'd want to consider whenever you're doing site selection. So you'd have a comparative report that would have all that information present. And then lastly, exception reports are going to be automatically generated when some condition is met. A lot of times this is going to be whenever you drop below a certain threshold. So maybe you would want to have a exception report generated whenever you drop below 20% of supply of something, particularly something you sell a lot of. That'd be a great candidate for an exception report to know to go ahead and order some more. And that's basically just anything where you set some sort of condition. As soon as that condition's met, it's going to send an email. Maybe it's going to have a flashing alert, whatever the case may be. That's what's going to happen there. Any questions about any of these? Certainly happy to address any questions about any of these reports or anything in the class. I'm not saying it has to be about a report to answer a question. So let's talk a little bit about how IS supports these different functional areas. Now, again, you're not going to have to memorize this on a test. Well, you're not going to have to memorize much of anything on the test because it's open book, open note. But, in terms of, I'm not going to ask you what is a strategic decision that an information system plays a role with finance. I'm not going to ask you that. But it just kind of shows how each of the functional areas can be benefited at each major level of the organization, operational, tactical, and strategic. It's a really cool chart to kind of show how information systems can be used for any of these things. Again, I'm not going to go over all 15 squares here. There's quite a lot of information here. But it's a really cool chart for that reason. So enterprise resource planning system, these are going to be very beneficial. We talked, I believe it's chapter 1, where we talked about what they were and how they kind of share information across each of the functional units. And that's going to really greatly reduce the presence of something called an information silo. So an information silo occurs whenever you have one functional unit that has access to information that no other functional unit does. So for example, let's say that we had an accounting department, maybe accounts payable, and they had access to information about different transactions, but they didn't share it with the rest of the organization. So they would have an information silo because they were the only functional unit within the organization that had access to that information. And I have on the slides like a fixed lack of communication. I don't really like to say it fixes lack of communication, but it can certainly mitigate lack of communication between departments because maybe instead of having to go to accounts payable and manually receive the things you have to pay for, maybe you could instead simply run a query and say, what are the outstanding, what are the outstanding invoices right now? What do we have that's due coming up? And, that can certainly address lack of communication between different functional units. And, in addition to that, it really kind of helps facilitate having, some level of shared knowledge within the organization. So, there's not going to be one department that has all this information that no other department has. And it can really kind of aid in making sure everyone's on the same page with everything. So there's some different examples here. I'm not going to go over them really. But basically, each of these companies here, we have SAP, we have Oracle, and PeopleSoft. They all offer kind of these sort of cookie cutter ERPs where companies can actually go through and they can, easily use any of these, and they can just basically insert it straight into their organization's operations. And, with that, that's going to be heavily commoditized. So we talk about a commodity. A commodity is something that is going to be the same no matter where you purchase it from. So if you purchase a PeopleSoft license from PeopleSoft, it's going to be the same as if you purchase it. Basically any company can go purchase a license to use PeopleSoft. And that means that you can't really say that you're getting anything that another company could also get from it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But before we do, let's kind of cover the differences in ERP and ERP2. The only main difference is that ERP2 is going to have a lot more web components associated with it. In practice, I'll go ahead and tell you, you'll probably never see this distinction. On the exam, I will probably ask a question about what's the difference between ERP and ERP2. And the answer is going to be the ERP2 has a lot more web components associated with it. But there are some other distinctions as well. It's just not commonly made in practice. I just want to make sure that's clear to everyone, so you don't go out to a job and be like, we're using ERP or ERP2. They're going to look at you like, I don't know what that is, So this is kind of, it's typically all going to be called ERP. But from a definitional standpoint, there are some distinctions to discuss. So ERP is going to be the initial kind of system, and this is going to be heavily geared towards manufacturing firms, where it's going to have a lot of components that are really dedicated to like manufacturing inventories, different sorts of things surrounding the manufacturing of goods. Well, not every firm does that. So ERP2 is less focused on manufacturing, and it's more focused on just any company. It could certainly have manufacturing components, but doesn't have to though. And in addition to that, it's also going to have some more functional areas than ERP would include. But again, you're not going to actually see a distinction in practice. Just know that, the main difference is going to be the web components. So here's the different components again. I think we've kind of gone through these enough. But basically, just know that these are the major components of the ERP. And, each of these play a very large role in sharing information. So that's basically what they are. Now, in addition to that, though, it's important to note that just because you implement an ERP, it's not going to necessarily be successful. Something like at least 75%, maybe upwards of 90% of ERP implementations are failures. Now, that sounds a little bit scary when you say that if you implement something that has almost a 90% chance of failing, why would you ever implement it then? Well, it doesn't mean that it completely failed. It didn't kill their company or anything. When we talk about a project failure, what we're saying is that the original, the original constraints that we selected were not fulfilled. So, for example, if we set a deadline of, having this done in 1 year, and it's done in 1 year and 1 day, that's considered a failure. But to most people, that wouldn't necessarily be a failure. If we set a budget constraint of $1 million and it ended up costing us $1,001, that would also be a failure. We didn't meet the original requirements of this implementation. So that's kind of what we're talking about with failure. Now, some failures could be a lot worse than that. There's certainly been a lot of cases where the project was never completed. It ended up costing 5 times as much, and we never got a finished product out of it. That could certainly happen as well. But that's kind of what we're talking about. There's a lot of different things here. Improper planning, that would be where we didn't properly account for certain things we needed to include. Could also be where we didn't properly, determine what sort of requirements we should have. Maybe we didn't budget enough money. Maybe we didn't budget enough time. Maybe we didn't budget enough features, that sort of thing. Making wrong decisions, that could be anything. Basically, you had different options and you picked the wrong ones. That's all there is to say there. Managerial issues. This is a huge one. Basically, if the management doesn't buy in, they're not, overly enthusiastic about it, you probably shouldn't do it. Because if you don't have management buy-in to something, it's unlikely to be successful. They're not going to devote the resources. They're not going to encourage its use. They're not going to do much of anything with it. So you shouldn't really bother at that point. I know it's a little harsh, but that's reality there. Lack of resources. Maybe we initially budgeted $1 million, but we noticed down the line that we had maybe something happened to our firm, but we can't devote $1 million to it anymore. So, lack of resources could be resources we initially budgeted for are no longer available to us. Consultants dependency, this is another big one. This would be where we had a system that's heavily dependent upon one specific firm's products, and maybe that firm goes under, or maybe they don't end up doing everything they said they would. And, we're basically stuck with data that we can't move anywhere else. That could be a huge problem. There's some firms that are very, how should I put this to where I don't get myself in trouble? Let's just say there's certain firms that are well known for making your data not very easy to be moved between different vendors. And, they're very well-known firms. I'm not going to mention them, but, you'd probably want to avoid firms like that. You want to make sure that your data could be taken anywhere. And we're going to talk in, I believe it's chapter, I don't remember the chapter number, but there's a chapter about data management. We're going to talk about something called structured query language that would actually allow us to easily not have the data stored in a specific vendor's product. Instead, it's going to be stored in a relational database that we can easily associate lots of different products with. We can, get the data out of it easily if we need to, that sort of thing. So those are some common examples of what could lead to an ERP failure. Let's talk a little bit about how they're hosted. So we've got a couple options here. We could do something called an on-premise ERP. And with this, there's a couple different types of these on-premise ERPs. So basically what this is saying is that we're going to host the entirety of the system on site. So we're going to basically have a server that's running whatever ERP we're using. We're owning the server, basically. That's what it is. So we can have vanilla approach. And in a vanilla approach, what we do is we purchase one of these, something like one of these, where it's already kind of ready to be used, and we just use it as is. And then in a custom approach, we basically build everything from scratch. And in best of breed approach, we do some combination of it. So in other words, maybe we'd look at this and we'd say, well, the finance and accounting and maybe the, the marketing, those modules both fit our organization just fine, but maybe the manufacturing doesn't fit our organization at all. So we're going to do a kind of a best of breed approach where we use both of those approaches. And for some things, we're going to use vanilla. For other things, we're going to use custom. But in custom, we wouldn't use anything that was already available. So we'd make everything completely new. And the only difference here is the level that we're going to be customizing each of these different modules. So again, we look at what an ERP has, the different components. There could be a couple different modules for finance and accounting, some human resource modules, stuff like that. So that's the main difference between these different approaches to implementing these ERPs. Is vanilla is going to use everything as is, and then custom approach is going to use nothing as is, and then best of breed is going to use some stuff as is. Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions about this? Okay, we've got a little bit left, and it's going to get pretty interesting at the end, I think. So let's keep going. So if we don't want to host the service locally, we could also use it software as a service, where we're going to have a third party actually host everything on our behalf. And that's very beneficial for us for a lot of different reasons. We're going to have huge savings on upfront costs. So if we're hosting something on premise and we're a large organization, we're probably going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on, servers that would allow us to, okay, I just lost the slides, it looks like. I'm not sure what just happened there, guys. Sorry about that. Let me get back to my spot. Is there a way to... It looks like I got to do it all manually here. So anyway, I'll just continue what I was saying. Yeah. So basically, you'd be able to purchase all the stuff all at once. And, if you're using on-premise, you would be responsible. You, the company, would be responsible for actually hosting everything, having the server equipment, having a server room, having the network capacity, having the protection on the server. All that would be something that you would have to do yourself. Whereas with software as a service, that's all going to be done on the vendor side. So it's going to be a lot more scalable. In other words, let's say that you start off, you have 1,000 employees when you first implement an ERP. Maybe 10 years down the road, you have 10,000 employees. So you could just upgrade the capacity as you go. Whereas with something on premise, you're not likely going to be able to do that. So instead, you're going to have to go purchase the servers as you need them. Let's say you downsize your company a little bit. Maybe you go from 1,000 employees to 800 employees. Well, if you're having something on premise, then you have excess capacity that you're paid for. So that's the main distinction there. There's a lot of different things, but mostly you're just going to access this with a web browser online, and that's pretty much how you'd get to it. Okay. So I also want to kind of cover the ERP support for business processes. And basically, the ERP is going to be involved in any of these processes. When you're purchasing, equipment to use for whatever your primary business activity is, it's going to be a procurement process. It's all going to be accounted for through the ERP. Same thing with order fulfillment. You're going to have all the quantities that you're selling. They're going to be included. It's going to go ahead and adjust your inventories for you. It's going to send out invoices. It's going to send them to accounts receivable for you. It's going to handle all that sort of stuff for you. It's also going to streamline your production process. It could even do things like generate quotes for you. I mean, this is going to do a lot of different things. And the entire purpose is that basically from the time that a dollar enters our organization to leaves it, we have documentation of that dollar. And that's something that's going to be very beneficial for us for auditing and for lots of other things as well. Here's a basic order fulfillment process. Just to kind of show you what a cross-functional process would look like, where we're using lots of different functional units. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but basically what happens is a request is going to be created. It's going to be sent to approval. It's going to get a PO started. It's going to go to fulfillment. It's going to get the goods. Then it's going to have some sort of accrual. It's going to do all that. It's going to have the invoice sent. It's going to be sent into the finance system. And ultimately, you're going to get the payment. Payment's going to be ultimately received. That's what the fulfillment process will look like. This is a pretty simple process here. If you're actually looking at what these processes look like in a large organization, they're going to be a lot larger than this. But that wouldn't fit on a slide, so couldn't use it. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit, though. This is the last topic of the day. This is a very interesting article. It came out in 2003 in Harvard Business Review. And it's been cited over 2,000 times by other journal articles. And it's called IT Doesn't Matter. So what Nicholas Carr argues is that any technology cannot be used by a firm to generate value for a firm because it's commoditized. So anything commoditized, by definition, has a set price and a set, there's certainly going to be a set price to where if you go and you sell it, you're going to get the same price than you would if you bought it, basically. That's what a commodity is. If you have a gallon of gasoline, it's going to have relatively the same cost. If you have an ounce of gold, it's going to have relatively the same cost. You're not able to really do much with gasoline to make it more valuable. You can't really do much with gold to make it more valuable. If you're a famous enough artist, maybe you could, but we're not getting into that. In the most case, a commodity is going to be something that's going to be traded at market rates. Otherwise, you'd be able to have arbitrage. And you can't really do that because prices are going to be the same throughout the market. So, in general, when we talk about competitive advantage, we want to have value. And we want to have something that's valuable that our competitors can't get. So that means that the asset has to be both valuable. So in other words, we're going to place a value on it and others are going to place a value on it. It's got to be rare. It cannot be easily obtained. It's impossible to imitate, and more recent adaptations of this are going to say difficult to imitate, but it also has to be usable by our organization. So when we're talking about an ERP, it can be valuable. People are willing to pay money for it. It can provide value to our firm. It can reduce our cost of goods sold, that sort of thing. It can be difficult to imitate, but not impossible to imitate. And it can be usable by our organization, but it's not rare. Any company can go out and purchase the exact same ERP if we're using a commoditized ERP product. So therefore, Carr and others would argue you can't actually get value from it. It's not going to actually provide you with a competitive advantage. for the firm because it's not something that your firm is unique in doing. So that's kind of the whole concept here is, how do we achieve competitive advantage by doing something that other firms cannot just easily obtain? So that's kind of the conclusion there. Someone who hasn't spoken, what do you think about this? Do you think the IT matters or do you think it doesn't matter? There's no right or wrong answers. Has anyone not spoken? That's a question. Well, I mean, there have since been a lot of criticism of this work, the IT doesn't matter piece. But, Nicholas Carr, I would say, is inarguably correct if we hold the assumptions of what value is, that, commoditized technologies are not going to be valuable. Doesn't mean that they're not going to have a cost associated with them. They're not going to have a price, but they're not going to generate you competitive advantage if we take that definition to be true. The flip side is, could technologies be valuable? Could non-commoditized technologies be valuable? And I think we've seen some good examples of some commoditized technologies not be that valuable, and some good examples of non-commoditized technologies be highly valuable. I mean, think back to the first day of class where I showed the different market caps of the firms. The 5 top most valuable companies were IT firms. They were firms that had technology. Now, the thing is that their technologies are protected by different sorts of intellectual property. So that's going to greatly enable them to, have those protections and to make it less easy to imitate, more rare, basically. So Travis says, I think it matters because it allows for more efficiency. It can, but the flip side to that is that, it will allow for more efficiency, but your competitors will also be doing the same thing. So, let's say that your current cost of goods sold is $30. You implement an ERP, maybe your cost of goods sold drops to $28 or something. That'd be a marginal cost of goods sold, of course. But, the flip side is that your competitors would do the same thing. And that's the argument that Carr makes. It certainly could be a temporary competitive, but it's certainly not going to be a sustained competitive advantage, I would say. Does that make sense to everyone? Because we're talking about a sustained competitive advantage, it can be a little different than a competitive advantage because it's something that we're able to sustain long term, whereas we otherwise would not really be able to sustain it long term. It's something that we may be able to have for a year or two, but then after that, it's going to be imitated or it's not rare in the first place. Any other questions before we sign off here? All right, well, I hope that all of you are able to attend the debate next class. It's going to be hopefully pretty interesting. Hopefully have some good discussion there about, should these companies be engaging in this or should they not? I look forward to hearing what you all have to say. I hope you all have a great day.
Well, I had one question, Mr. Lee.
Okay, yeah, sure.
It's about next week. Okay, so our first exam one is on Tuesday the 14th, right?
Let me pull up the schedule. I don't want to tell you wrong. It'll just be 1 second here.
Okay.
I think that's correct. Yeah, the 14th is going to be exam 1. That'll be online. You'll just do it on Canvas whenever you get a chance.
Is there like a set time you have to do it, like between 1 to 2, or you just have all day on the 14th to complete it?
So what I'll do is I'll actually have it open at 11 p.m. the night before. So it'll technically open at 11 p.m. on the 13th, and it'll technically close at 1 a.m. on the 15th. So you have a 26-hour window there, basically all day the 14th. I'd recommend you do it earlier rather than later, just in case something happens. If you have any sort of issues with it, you can let me know, and I can look into it a little further. But mostly as long as you do it during that window, you should be fine.
Okay, and as far as exam 1 review, so we're going to be able to log on the 13th between 1 to 2, and you'll review the exam instead of lecture about a certain chapter.
Yeah, exactly. So I believe I still have a technology guide that day as well, technology guide 1 over hardware. That's going to be pretty quick. It's just going to be a handful of slides where I kind of cover the technology slide or technology guide rather. And, but beyond that, you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions that you'd like to. I'll give you a list of all the, I'm not going to say all, I'm going to say at least 95% of the topics that'll be covered on the exam. I'm going to give you a list of them. You can ask questions about any of them. There's no limit to how many questions you can ask. Just you ask, I'll answer, basically. That's kind of how it works. If I need to go over anything in more detail, if I need to cover something again, I'm certainly happy to do that for anyone who attends. And you can also, of course, email any questions, stuff like that. So.
Okay,
yeah.
and as far as final exam, when will that window be open? I see the last lecture is going to be on the 30th of July, but then you have on August 3rd to 4th the final exam. So we'll have so how would that work?
So for final exams, I'm not sure exactly how it is supposed to work at the university level, but the way I do it, and I haven't gotten in trouble for it yet, is I just have it open from the entire window that the final exam window is open at the university. So they have final exams on both the 3rd and the 4th. So I'm just going to leave it open for that time. Of course, you'll have a time limit. So
we'll have like 48 hours to get it done, though.
Roughly 48, maybe 50. I'd have to be careful of that one, though, because the university is kind of particular about if I have something that's due in a certain time, like they have that window. It's like called a reading day or something, where I can't really have anything due. So I probably wouldn't be able to open it up before the 3rd at, what would that be, like 12 a.m. or something? Basically, the first minute of that 3rd, August 3rd, and then close at the very last minute of August 4th. So as long as you take it somewhere in that time, you'll be fine.
Okay, then. Well, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one on the final exam. Is it going to have the same questions from the first and second exam, or will they be different?
There'll probably be some overlap of questions. There will be a lot more questions, and it'll be cumulative. But the good news about that is that, let's say that someone takes exam 1 or exam 2, and maybe they don't do as well as they could have. It can replace one of those 2 grades if it benefits them. So there will probably be some overlap there. So certainly, if you take an exam and you're not sure about a question, certainly it'd be a great idea to review it if you get the chance, or you can ask me, what the question, what the answer to the question is. I'll be happy to tell you after the exam. So.
Yes, so you'll give us the correct to the ones we got wrong after each exam?
Well, so, the way that I kind of handle that is that since it's an online exam, you can set up a Skype meeting with me and I can show you your score report and go over anything that you missed. But also you could ask me, like, let's say in the next lecture or whatever after it, you could ask me, hey, I wasn't sure about this question. Can you go through it and, kind of explain, what the answer would be? I'm certainly happy to do that as well. You could email me about any question you had, something to that effect. So, like, let's say that you take exam 1 and there's a question on there that you're not sure about. I would be happy to address that question, anytime. So as long as you've submitted the exam, of course, anytime from then till the final, I'm happy to address the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions about that or anything? All right, I should go ahead and end the recording, by the way.